Hello there and welcome to Zero XP. We are a show that celebrates the fandom of video games with a focus on one game series in particular, Fable. We strive to bring you several episodes a month discussing a variety of game-related topics spanning recent game news and events to reflection and speculation concerning past, present, and future video game generations. I'm John and I'm sitting here with my co-host, who is the unstoppable force behind our show, Patrick.
Hello.
You can find us on YouTube at youtube.com/0xp webcast.
Be sure to like, subscribe, and comment.
You can also get each episode in podcast form across all major podcast platforms. If we're not on the platform of your choice, please let us know. If you'd like to contact us directly, you can by emailing us at 0xppodcast@gmail.com or by following us on Twitter at 0xpwebcast. Our DMs are open. On today's show, we are reaching our Season 1 finale. That's right. We're going to be talking about Fable: The Lost Chapters. Obviously, if you've been with us this far, you've been kind of listening to our journey as we played back through the game and examined some of the lore along the way, and I think really kind of dove deep into what made us fans about it. So we just kind of want to do a summary episode before we move on to Season 2, which, I mean, rightfully so, we'll be covering Fable 2. But before we get into it, Patrick, looking back on everything, I mean, how do you feel like the journey has been?
It's been good. It's been rough at some times because this is my first podcast I've ever done, and going into YouTube, and really a year ago never thinking I would make YouTube videos at all, let alone learn a little bit of editing.
Yeah, and also navigating our way through, quarantine and COVID and trying to work our personal lives in throughout that whole year. Just it's been a huge learning process for us.
I mean, well, for me personally, losing a job because of COVID and starting another one and schedule changes, and I mean, it's been an interesting 10 years
in the last year.
Yeah.
It really has been a lot of learning, and I think along with the rest of the world, having the ups and downs on top of everything has been strange. I don't think that would have been our intention to really launch our podcast webcast during a pandemic, but at the time we didn't know it was going to go this long.
Yeah.
Before we get into the legacy, or at least what we think is the legacy of Fable: The Lost Chapters, I want to take a minute just to say thanks, because we have had far more interaction than I think we ever thought possible. We've gotten to talk with devs of the series, with Dean, obviously, and Ted, and Damien, as far as the art goes. We've had great conversations with people who are just fans of Fable in general, with Todd Quest and Charlie, and I'm just, man, I wish I could paint all these people that we talk to. I wouldn't say weekly necessarily, but I mean, for a while there, it definitely was. And it's kind of not that I'm surprised there's a community based around the game, but the fact that people have been so interactive and so kind and giving their opinions and really kind of not raking us over the coals for putting on some pretty bad show for a while.
Well, and me having social anxiety, it's kind of weird when someone's like, when are you going to do streaming? Or are you going to do any of this other stuff? And it's like, you want more?
Right. So it's been great, and that's why we really feel like it's important to say thanks, because it's really given us a drive to keep doing this.
Yeah.
Because it hasn't always been easy trying to make our schedules work to make it happen. And I think if we hadn't got the amount of not just feedback, but like I said, actual conversations, the comments that we get, the interactions that we have, and really just kind of the fun that we get to feel together as a community of people who are fans of Fable, it's really made a ton of difference to me, not to mention being able to record with you, Patrick, but I mean, it's been icing on the cake for sure.
With the way our life schedules have been, if it wasn't for the conversations that we've had with people, I don't know that it would have continued.
It's definitely given us a drive, so I can't say it enough. Thank you, thank you, thank you. It's been a really kind of fun year.
Yeah.
Holy cow. Yeah, it's been about a year for us. So thanks. Okay, so getting into it, Patrick, I wanted to bring up, and I will bring it up again when we end this conversation, but it's something I've been thinking about a lot lately. We're specifically talking about Fable the Lost Chapters here. We're not talking about the sequels or any of the spin-off series that have to do with Fable, or even the next game necessarily that's coming from Playground. But as a whole, not just in terms of Xbox, not just in terms of, the property itself, is there anything that sticks out to you as the legacy or what's going to come from the legacy of Fable the Lost Chapters specifically?
So I'm going to give a little bit of an unexpected reply here.
Okay.
Fable was the first game that I played, and this is more specifically because I came in at Fable 2, but I do think, and I know for a lot of people they relate to it in Fable 1. I just started later. One thing I know that is a big deal to people is this was either one of the first games or the first game that allowed people to be, that had gay characters, and it wasn't a big thing. Like it wasn't like making fun of it. It was just like a thing you could do. It was a thing that was accepted.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. At least as far as it's one of the first games I played where you could have same-sex marriage and the game didn't blink an eye.
Yeah.
The characters didn't treat you as it was anything unique. And I mean, at that point, we're talking 2004, we didn't quite have the storytelling that a lot of games have now, where they can really get into the nuances and what that means to people. But as far as just treating it like, yeah, this is normal life.
And if you're younger in 2004, the U.S., things were looked at a lot differently like that.
Yeah, so that's a good answer.
And
that's a major step.
Yeah, it really was, because like I've met a few people that, I mean, Fable gave them the courage to come out to their parents.
Oh,
wow.
Wow.
Yeah, it gave people a reason to accept themselves.
Okay.
I think that's a big deal that might not seem like a big deal now. Well, it is a big deal now. But, I mean, at the time, it was like kind of revolutionary in that way that it just didn't make fun of gay people.
Right.
It just allowed you to be.
Oh, that's
and
incredible.
It was accepted.
Yeah. I didn't know that you had that experience, which just totally makes my answer weird now, because I was gonna no, I was actually going to get a little bit more into I don't know that the legacy of this game has been defined or will be defined yet, because I think in a lot of terms it will be defined based off what we get next in the franchise, what carries forward from this game. And then you went and did that. So, yeah, good answer. So let's get into the game itself a little bit more. And kind of before we revisit the legacy conversation at the end of the show, we're going to kind of break things down as to just our overall feelings. Like, not a full analyzation. We've got, multiple episodes to kind of go over that. But just kind of a look back at everything. And I think I kind of want to start with gameplay, because weirdly enough, when it comes to Fable the Lost Chapters, gameplay is maybe the most boring part of the conversation for me.
It's definitely the most dated, going back and playing it.
Right. And I believe we talked about this when we both played through it. You played it with the Fable 2 controls, didn't you? And I played it with the original controls as it was set. And that's strictly because that's how I experienced the game from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
I played it before Fable 2 was out. You didn't jump on board until Fable 2. But the thing that I will give it from a gameplay standpoint isn't necessarily the mechanics of the gameplay itself. It's the fact, for me at the time, I was never an RPG gamer. Growing up, I think I was more into I loved platformers, my Mario. I loved Zelda for my adventure games, and played a lot of sports games, quite frankly.
Yeah.
Fable was the first game that was an RPG that made me go, oh, this is... okay, maybe I do like RPGs. Maybe I didn't understand what an RPG was before this, because in my mind, everything had been kind of the more JRPG style with turn-based fighting and your character classes and things to that effect. And Fable allowed me just to go into the world and play the game I wanted to play it.
Yeah.
Actually play a role in the world. And that's kind of what stuck out to me with the gameplay, was if I wanted to be a sword fighter, I could, or a warrior, whatever you want to call it. If I wanted to be an archer, if I wanted to be a wizard, the game allowed me to make that choice. And I think, there were definitely other games out at the time that would allow you to kind of do those things. But Fable was the first one that really kind of, I think, summed it up in a way that I could understand it.
Yeah.
It just made it easy to do. Like, the game adapted itself to my play style.
Well, and I think part of that is the game isn't as much fantasy as it is fairy tale. I mean, you could say there is some fantasy elements in there, but it's not like you're going into a full-blown, like even something like Skyrim now, where it's full nerd. You know what I mean?
Totally.
Which, I mean, we love those, but when you jump straight into them, they're quite a bit.
Oh,
and this
exactly.
was kind of a gradual step.
It's kind of, again, I mean, I referenced The Legend of Zelda, which, I mean, it's not that game doesn't take thought to play it. I mean, it's very, I mean, I'm not telling anybody anything new. Hey, guess what? Zelda's great, just in case you didn't know. Absolutely love Zelda.
Critics disagree.
But, when you look at games like The Witcher, I don't know that I ever would have touched it if it hadn't been for Fable getting my foot in the door. Mm-hmm. These games that are so in-depth, you mentioned Skyrim, when you look at games like Dragon Age, and really, it's Fable was the precursor for all of those games for me, The Lost Chapter specifically, because it really opened my mind up to what a video game could be. It kind of changed me from being somebody who played games as, just a pastime, to being something like, oh, this is kind of my hobby now. Yeah. This is something that I don't think I'm going to stop doing. And that was, almost 20 years ago. So here we are. Now, for you, I would imagine that your perception of that's a little bit different, right? Because you came in later.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what do you take away from that? Anything?
I mean, I kind of share a lot of the same feelings you do, but it was Fable 2, and it was years later. Mm-hmm. But as far as it introduced me into RPGs a bit more, I mean, I completely agree. I like it. We're the exact same path that way, just two different games.
That's funny. Okay, so that's really all I have to say about gameplay itself. I still really enjoyed the Fable Lost Chapters gameplay. I don't know at the end of the day, and I suspect I'll have a better answer or an analysis for it myself, or opinion, I guess, if you, to be accurate, after we play Fable 2 and Fable 3 for that matter.
Yeah.
But I still really enjoy the Lost Chapters gameplay.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, I do think going forward, as far as bows were a lot more fun to play and things like that.
Absolutely. That's one of the things that I felt got lost. It almost, in some ways, became too simplistic.
Yes.
Personally, that's my opinion. Now, to me, I like the idea to have both, because you can play it the way you want to play it.
Yep.
Okay, so I picked gameplay initially to get out of the way. I mean, strictly because there's just not too much to expound on. I mean, we could get into the mechanics and the fights and things like that and the nuances. But like I said, we've talked about these things, and this is kind of meant to be a, pretty much love letter to the game. And I feel like that's probably going to get the least amount of love because it's just the, most basic thing to talk about. Next, I want to talk a little bit about or at least get into the graphics, but less the graphics and more of the art style of Fable The Lost Chapters. It's been accused of being ugly, I think, by a large amount of people. I personally absolutely adore the art style in Fable The Lost Chapters. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, I really think the only issues with the art style was just the small team that they had at the time when they made the original one, with some of the faces and things. But as far as the character designs and what they were going for, I love the baggy clothing and that whole style.
Yeah, the large hands and the large feet. And, I don't know. I loved everything about it because it wasn't quite realistic, but it wasn't quite completely cartoony either.
Yeah.
I never really had a problem with the faces. I think my only complaint would have been the lack of character variety in some instances because all the guards look the same. Yeah. The majority of the villagers look the same, just maybe some different clothing and things like that. But everything from the enemies to the world itself to the different locations. I mean, I could go on and on. I mean, what you want to expound, Patrick?
Yeah, I mean, I think the region design is one of the things that really has always brought me into Fable. I mean, I have to talk as someone who started as 2, but going from 2 to Fable 1, I mean, as far as the regions and the way they're designed, it's not really much of a downgrade. The only difference is the size they could make them. But other than that, I think they have some of the... I mean, the regions are great.
Well, and you've got to, I guess, really acknowledge that part of that is the original was an original Xbox game.
Yeah.
Versus Fable 2 and 3 were Xbox 360 games. So obviously they could do more not only with the memory of the system, but the memory of the discs themselves. Mm-hmm. And I still think that they've just packed so much character into each region. I mean, not every building was unique, but the buildings that were made to stick out, you knew they were made to stick out because they were just undeniable in a lot of ways. The different regions all felt like they had their own, how would I put it, culture?
Yeah.
In a lot of ways. I mean, you could pick them out one by one, really, and I mean, they are just so different.
I mean, you go from Hook Coast to
Knothole Glade
to Bowerstone
to Oakvale.
Yeah. I
mean, the bandit camp. I mean, we could go on and on. The guild itself. I mean, everything just felt like it was these little pocket of people that easily, because it was meant to be, England had fallen all under the same umbrella and given you that, well, it's all a fall setting, or, it's all kind of similar, but maybe this area is a little bit more rainy and things like that. While it had some of those things, by really diversifying the people, which is very typical of England, I mean, it just really added so much character to the game. It can't be denied.
Everyone always says Albion is a character in the game.
Exactly, and that's kind of the thing. That's why when we talk about the future of the franchise is that they've got to nail Albion.
Yes.
It is so important.
Yeah, I forget the guy's name, but there's someone that his character is like, or his title is like Fable World Director or something like that. And I'm just like, man, what a great and horrible job.
Right. Because you've got to get it right, but it's also got to feel new at the same time.
I'd be scared.
I don't know. I think especially if, I'm not actually familiar with that job title, but I think that you wouldn't take that on if you didn't think, A, you could do it justice, and B, you didn't have at least a deep admiration of what came before. But I don't know. I'm anxious to see what comes next. But there's just things in Fable: The Lost Chapters that, to me, partially because of the timeline, I don't think we got from the sequels or really any other games since then, because it did have it's that fairy tale kind of setting.
Yeah.
When you talk about like the different enemies, the trolls are unique in this game. They don't look like that going forward. The
Wolverines look different.
And I think we disagree on this. I don't remember, but I actually like the Wolverines from The Lost Chapters more than I do any of the other games.
Yeah.
Because to me, they looked less wolf-like and more, horrific. Almost, it could be like Lovecraftian, or even, because they almost have like a lizard wolf kind of quality to them.
Well, they almost get more, I think they get more human as they go.
Right, and I really don't care for that personally. They definitely took on more of the werewolf lore, I think, as time went on. Whereas I prefer kind of the uniqueness of the first game. But then also, down to the heroes. That was another thing that I felt kind of got lost in time, was the heroes definitely felt like, I don't like to always make the comparison, but I mean, kind of like they felt like the Jedi of their world. You know, they weren't quite the guards or the police or, you know, whatever institution that Albion had in place officially, and they weren't quite, you know, good or bad. They fell all over the spectrum. It was really so much character packed into those, and the character designs themselves reflected that very well. I mean, when you're talking Briar Rose, I mean, she's got rose-tinted glasses, and, you know, her outfit just kind of reflects her confidence, I think, as a character.
She's a bit of a rock star before there was rock.
Right, exactly. And then, of course, you know, you've got Red Riding Hood, Scarlet Robe, who is that twist on that old fairy tale. And I think that's what's different is we get that fairy tale setting. That is why it's so important that the world reflects that, because the world could have accidentally become a fantasy setting, and given you like traditional trolls and things to that effect.
Orcs.
Yeah, but instead we got, you know, the big bad wolf. We got, you know, fairies. We got, you know, mischievous little hobs that, I could go on about them all day. I mean, they just scream character. But, I mean, you wouldn't, regardless of how they were written, I don't think you get the same feel for it without the art style and the way that the game was designed, the way that the graphics were done. Even with the limitations that they had at the time, it just has so much character packed into each little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and I mean, we don't have Fable without what set the foundation of all of the preceding games, and really even set the foundation for the, I guess you would say, prequel in the Tales of Albion, and what would have eventually become Fable Legends had that released. Story-wise, what sticks out to you? What are your thoughts? How do you feel? Was it stereotypical? Was it unique? Was it both?
I would say it was definitely unique, and once again, we're going to talk fairy tale. One of my favorite and also least favorite missions is the one where you go to rescue the boy from the cave, because
he was so annoying.
Yeah, he's so annoying, but at the same time, you know, the story of going into the cave, you know, the grandmother's so worried about him, and then, you know, you find out that Granny was sending him down there to basically bring things back to sell for money.
Yeah, it was her fault.
It feels like it could be its own picture book that you open up and just read the whole tale from beginning to end.
Well, and that story in particular, I mean, really screams that old original Grimm's fairy tales, where it wasn't like these happy endings. They were meant to be cautionary. There were these dark elements. Adults really sucked in those stories a lot of the time.
And the Lady Grey storyline, I mean, there's so many pieces to that. If you choose to turn her in, you don't get as much story, but then you really get a lot of depth when you try to marry her and don't turn her into the guards. And I love that stuff, because these are side missions, but they feel like these just fully fledged stories.
Yeah, that Lady Grey arc in particular, I mean, I think is one of the better stories in the entire game. Like, it really sticks out, where, I mean, you could essentially pass up the majority of it if you wanted to.
Yeah.
But it just felt so important, and such a waste to not take advantage of letting that story be told.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think you normally didn't marry her and then found out probably a few playthroughs later that there was so much more going on.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yes, yeah. Which, I mean, I think I can say that about a couple different instances in the game, because I have a bad habit of making decisions that I like repeatedly, unless I go well out of my way to make the alternate decision, just to see how the story plays out. And for me, I mean, this game was out before YouTube was, I mean, if it was around, it was definitely in its infancy, but I don't even think it was around at the time. So it wasn't like I could go look up.
I think it was, but not like it is now.
Okay. It wasn't like I could go and look up the alternate path. You know, a lot of games now, when they're 50, 60 hours long, I don't want to trek all the way back through it to see what's different. Fable has always kind of been the outlier in that, which, because I love the world so much, I will play it multiple times to find the different endings and outcomes in the stories. But that one I had no trouble playing multiple times, and even back then I wasn't someone who would play a game multiple times, but it was just too good to not find out what those alternate routes were.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, the thing that sticks out to me is I will say that, I mean, there's a certain amount of, I would say, cliche to the story, and the way that, you know, you're a farm kid, family gets killed, goes on, gets trained, then turns out to be this, you know, ultimate power within the world that can only, you know, vanish this person. And I mean, that's just kind of the nature of how games were at the time. We know, after having conversations with Dean Carter and reading different interviews with different developers on the game, that, you know, there were elements at play there that didn't necessarily get to make it into the game. I think the overall thing, and it's always stuck out to me in a conversation from Dean, was that the idea was supposed to be a little bit more feudalistic, in the way that he wanted to present the idea that a power can rise up in this world, in this version of, you know, Fable of Albion as it exists, but something else is always going to come back or rise up that's just going to repeat the evil over and over and over. So it wasn't supposed to be a story of a character vanquishing evil from the world and everything was peachy afterward. It was, you know, there was a lot of portrayal in there that was meant to be, yeah, cool, you beat this bad guy, but don't get too comfortable, there's another one coming, and chances are your hero from this one's going to be a little bit too old to do anything about it. And I think if you really kind of look for that in the story, you can definitely see the threads are still there. But beyond that, I mean, there was, you know, we can't discount at all the humor of Fable. And this game had, I mean, so many funny moments mixed with some really kind of tragic moments, also mixed with some melodrama. I mean, like, it's all over the board. And I think that's the thing that a lot of games have picked up since then.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because we played games that are outright comedies from the get-go, beginning to end. We played games that are deeply serious from beginning to end. But this game is one of the, I would say, few that really touches every corner of where it could go. And I don't know, I don't think it can be overstated enough how important that is, and kind of how influential I think that probably was on a lot of people who played the game at the time.
Yeah, I mean, it's always interesting where you do see more games like that going forward, but when you have a moment and you're like, ha ha ha, you know, that was funny, then you go to the next mission, you're just like gutted by what happens.
Yeah, the things that you can't fix versus the things that you can, the decisions that you might have made that might inadvertently lead to a conclusion that you didn't want. I mean, there were games that were doing that at the time, but this game was maybe a little bit more humoristic, if that is a word, about it, which I always enjoyed. And, you know, again, if we're talking story, we're talking about the decisions between good and evil, and I can't stress enough to me how, like, blown away I was that if I made a good decision, you know, well, it reflected on me. I look all, like, kind of angelic, and I've got a halo, and I'm glowing, and, you know, all these things, butterflies. But if I make the wrong decisions, or if I'm outright evil, if I'm a terrible thing, yeah, I mean, you know, I start to bald, and I stink.
People run away from you.
Yeah, and
got flies
flies hang out around me. I get these huge horns. My eyes turn red.
Like a red fire trail when you run.
Yeah, I mean, like, it was so unique for the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of, with the technology we have, I'm surprised more games haven't taken that.
Yeah.
I mean, the most recent game that I've played that I think really kind of did that was Mass Effect, maybe, where if you made more of the renegade decisions, you'd kind of take on like a kind of sallow cybernetic.
Yeah, I've noticed
look.
A lot of games really don't use that.
Yeah.
I want to say in Death Stranding, you would grow like a bit of a horn. No. It was the last Metal Gear game.
Okay, I was gonna say I hadn't played it, so I didn't know that.
Yeah, you could grow like a bit. Like, I didn't play it either, but I saw where you'd grow like one devil horn.
Okay. I mean, Kojima, so it's not all that surprising. But I don't know. I like the character, like, influence modding, I guess I would call
Yeah.
it, where it's, you couldn't outrun your decisions. I think that was the thing. It was, I mean, we all play games where you can make your character super strong or super small, or you can dress them up a certain way that you want, change their armor. But Fable was like, hey, if you're gonna be a bad guy, you're gonna look like a bad guy.
Yeah, I mean, there's no, I didn't murder that village as your horns are growing.
Right, exactly. And I mean, like, it wasn't all that complicated or hard to completely change from one way to the other if you knew the game mechanics. But again, it was just so unique at the time, and it's something that I just can't believe we haven't seen more of.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and again, there's a list of games who have done things like that, but they don't seem to stand out in a lot of the same ways.
Yeah, I can't think of any bigger titles recently that have had huge character changes based off of your choices or how you act.
Right. So, and we can't talk about story without really getting into some of the lore. For me, they invented this world. Lionhead did, and the development team behind that, and everybody that contributed all the way around. But the lore of this game, for whatever reason, just hit all the right notes with me. It was kind of medieval, but it was fairy tale, not fantasy. There were these larger-than-life characters who we found out were kind of WWF inspired by just being these larger-than-life personas that, were a little cheesy in some aspects, but at the same time, it's people loved them, they cheered them, they, admired them, and the things that they built and that they put into place, and the stories that they told with these, I mean, almost action figures for a better comparison, is, I don't know how to put it other than, like, I don't know that Fable the Lost Chapters itself did anything that was so outstanding that it was undeniable, but it did so many great things with all the bits and pieces that the sum of its parts, to me, and I definitely the fan base, the community, it just had this lasting impact.
Yeah.
Is there any story that sticks out, any kind of part of the game that really just stuck with you, or is that your favorite? Or, I mean, I know you're a Maze fan, so
Yeah.
He's definitely there, but I mean, what do you think?
I mean, it's the Britishness of it.
Yeah.
As far as it's a different humor than we were accustomed to. It's really a bit of a different style of, a storytelling that we probably heard more of when we were kids, but not as much as adults, I would say.
Yeah, and speaking on the humor, I mean, growing up in the U.S., I mean, the closest thing that we would have to it would be Monty Python.
Yeah, Mr. Bean.
Right, yeah, but when you go back and you check out a lot of the shows from BBC and all that, I mean, it's literally a different style of humor, which, quite frankly, influenced me in the way that I'll go out of my way to check out different shows from, the UK, just because it is different.
I think a lot of people, it gave them kind of a bit of exposure. I mean, because Fable is really popular in the States, even compared to the UK. It's really popular, and I think maybe it's because we just weren't exposed to as much stuff like that at the time.
Well, and it was just so different.
Yeah,
but
definitely for video games.
So from like a story standpoint, is there anything that really just drove it into you, like Nostro and his journey, or Jack of Blades and his persona, or your character itself, the Guildmaster? I mean, what sticks out to you?
I think really some of the thing that stuck out to me that I really love is just something simple like getting books and taking it to the school.
Yep.
And then the teacher reading it to you and laughing hysterically because our character, who is a mute, drops like the only vulgarity that I know of in the game at one point.
Oh, yeah.
And it was just funny because he doesn't say a thing and then he's like, shit.
Yeah. I mean, I guess technically it's twice if you hit the wrong rocks in the wrong order.
Yeah, it's true.
But No, I mean, like, and that's the thing that gets me is we've talked about this before, but like the prison warden, you know, like I love him.
Yeah.
I love him. Like I could
unexpected personality. You expect him to be brooding.
Yes.
And like just like get in there, you know,
that
and
thing
here's your
where
prize.
I will go through that sequence multiple times just to hear his terrible poetry.
Yeah.
Things like, or the guy that he's on the docks in Bowerstone who makes you go and get a trader's mustache and a bowl cut, and which is parted down the middle.
So what I was about to say, which I love, because the whole time you're like, either, you know, the daughter's gonna be ugly, or what you're really thinking most of the time is like, she doesn't exist, but I'm still gonna play this out.
Exactly, and I play it every time I play the game.
Yep.
You know, whether I'm good or evil, I just play it that way.
And you can punch him when you're done.
But I mean, all of these things, all of these little stories, the witch who makes you, you know, track down the blue mushrooms because seemingly she just wants to get high.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. She's like, oh, I already had it right here. Give it to the boy.
But then again, the dark points of the hunter who killed the Balverine and then wound up turning into one. The arena and everything that's based in that. When you look at all of these things, Thunder and his journey, how he went from being like one of the highest regarded heroes to really just scraping for any kind of attention he could get by the end of the game. All of these things just culminate into this wonderful world that they built. And I mean, I could keep naming different story elements all day long, and it's just like I'm gonna find a bit of joy in all of them, except maybe that kid that I had to save from the Hob Cave because I hate him so much. But the interaction with him and his grandma was good by the time you get to the end of the mission.
And the fact that you can marry Granny. I mean, it gives you that kind of freedom.
Exactly. And that's a good point. The freedom that the game allows you is just a little bit ahead of its time, I think, or at least for the games that I was playing. I was never a PC gamer growing up, so I wasn't exposed to quite the amount of games I think that would have taken advantage of these kind of things. Mm-hmm. But definitely, I mean, coming from PlayStation and Nintendo and Sega, it was definitely it was completely unique.
Yeah, for sure.
So I guess that we can go ahead and wrap things up because we're not really telling you anything you don't know if you're listening. But again, this is our finale, and just wanting to again point out the things that really affected us and that we love so much about Fable: The Lost Chapters. I started the show with the conversation about legacy and kind of my question of what's the legacy going to be, and maybe that being a little ill-defined because we don't know what Playground's going to be doing with the next Fable. But I would say that if that game coming doesn't reflect so many of the things that Lionhead and its development team set in place, at least spiritually, they're going to be missing out.
Yeah, definitely. We're going to be missing out.
Yes, absolutely. It's just it's a weird balance that they've got to get right, and
they got to do their own things because Lionhead always experimented around, so change needs to happen.
Oh, for sure, yeah. I mean, like the thing is if they were to release the Lost Chapters today, it definitely wouldn't be as highly regarded or sought after because I mean, games age; they need to change with time, and I think that if Lionhead was still making Fable, we'd be looking at, you know, something entirely different in comparison to where it started. Maybe not in tone, maybe not in style or you know, even gameplay to an extent, but as far as what they learn and pick up along the way would evolve. I mean, there's just no way around that if you want to stay relevant. I just hope that it doesn't get lost. Yeah. Honestly, I will plant my flag in it. Depending on the day, I mean, it's you know, I'm old, so I've been gaming since the late 80s anyways. I mean, they really created something that, to me, if you really take the time to dig into it, competes with all of the big heavy hitters out there. I mean, I'm not a big first-person shooter guy, so I mean, I could name, you know, Halo and things like that, but just in terms of adventure, in terms of taking you on a journey, I mean, it ranks up there with the best Zeldas for me. I still have trouble deciding, depending on the day, if it's my all-time favorite game, but if it's not, it's definitely in the top 3.
Yeah.
But yeah, you asked me on the right day. Fable the Lost Chapters is my favorite game of all time. And I don't think, I absolutely wouldn't be doing a show based around it had I not played it in the beginning. And had it not changed my trajectory for the games that I play.
And one thing I want to say is that, Fable started out with a small team. The first game did really good. The second game did really, really good. And then, it had a shift in focus as far as the way that I would say Xbox management wanted it to be. And it suffered. And then Connect and what was ultimately Legends, where they had a Phil Harrison who wanted games to just be games of service. But even with all that stuff that went on, a studio closure, like Fable still survived it. Developers left. Studio closed, and fans loved it enough. It resonated with people enough that it's coming back. How many series can you say was with people so much that it did something like that?
Yeah, when you're talking, especially because it's a 17-year-old franchise that's had a 10-year gap
between a traditional game. Yeah. And you see, if you follow on Twitter, there's a lot of British developers and people coming from other countries that just really want to work on the game because it influenced them as a developer, how they viewed games.
Yeah, and I think that's actually kind of a good way to look at the legacy of it. It's something that they created, or that was created by Lionhead when it started. Really, the lasting appeal of it that has kept people waiting for another installment of it and still has that appeal and fervor behind it is something that, realistically, you could probably boil down to 100 games that people hold in that kind of regard pretty easily. And 100 games sounds like a lot, but not in terms of when you're talking about 40, 50 years of gaming at this point. Realistically, it's, we're thousands upon thousands of video games that are out there. So to crack that kind of appeal or, fan base, cultural moment, whatever you want to call it, is really rare. And it's something that this game did, and it did achieve. And hopefully we just get more and more of it going forward.
Yeah, hopefully the next one turns out good and everybody likes it and we get a better one next time.
All right. You ready to close it down?
Yep. Let's end it. Before we go, we'd like to thank those who helped contribute to the show. Zero XP logo was provided by Jameson Johns. You can find him at behance.net/Jameson Johns. Zero XP theme music was provided by Odd Reference. You can find him at facebook.com/odd.reference. Additional music by Russ Shaw.
And remember, you can find our show on YouTube at youtube.com/0xpwebcast.
Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that bell notification for our latest videos. Using these features lets YouTube know that you like our content and help other Fable fans find us.
If you prefer the podcast version of our show, you can find us across all major podcast platforms. If we're not on the podcast platform of your choice, please let us know. If you'd like to contact us, you can by contacting us on Twitter at 0xpwebcast or by shooting us an email at 0xppodcast@gmail.com. And before we go, we'd like to give thanks to those who have inspired us to do this show. Thank you, Dean. Thank you, Charlie. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Ted. Thank you, Damien. And until next time, our story has ended. Bye-bye-bye.
S-H-I-T
Bye-bye-bye.
hits.
Bye-bye.